Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Straight Talk Live. And we're so glad to come with you on this festive weekend. And Straight Talk Live, we're all about having a dialectical discourse between several great minds and lovers of God and lovers of humanity, and realizing that iron sharpens iron, but also that our goal is to be like God. God is just in the Trinity of God, distinct but inseparable. And we would like to think, as the people of God, we have our distinctions, but we are inseparable through the blood of Jesus Christ. And it's our love for God and a love for his humanity that knits us all together. And yet we live in this world, and there are many issues that have caused a dystopia instead of a utopia, but we're believing God ultimately for shalom from his mighty hand. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dennis, who's with us this morning, and let him greet everyone and give us any particulars we need to know.
Thank you, Van, and welcome to our audience this morning on Facebook and, of course, on YouTube that are being with us, and on our podcast on anchor.fm/talk straight. I've been getting a lot of response on the podcast, so we're glad you're with us. We are glad to be back. We've had several shows where we weren't on, so we're glad to have the team back and that we're back on to enjoy the show with you. So I'm going to turn back into Van so we can get right on with the panel and discuss what we're going to discuss for today.
All right. Well, I believe we're going to look at two topics today, unless the Lord leads us otherwise. This is the 4th of July weekend, our independence coming up. And also, we've just passed through Juneteenth being made a national federal holiday. And we're going to eventually talk about critical race theory, but isn't it interesting that we have two celebrations of liberation taking place now in the nation? And so I just wanted us to touch on both. I know Juneteenth represents the Emancipation Proclamation of the enslaved Africans in the Confederate States. And the 13th Amendment sets us all free nationally. And then the 4th of July, which is the traditional holiday of America, is actually when this nation of European descendants got its liberty from the British and the French and anybody else that was here, the Spanish, just totally free. So I'm going to open up for anybody that wants to jump in. I know that, again, Dr. Alaine, her schedule is tight because she's the hardest working woman in the Christian show business that I know of. So we're going to let her kick it off first. Good morning, Alaine.
Well, good morning. It is so good to be with you all and to be back. Well, there's a lot to say about Juneteenth. And my own personal story of that is I didn't even know that Juneteenth existed until I was in seminary. So I didn't know about it until about 20 years ago, when I had some friends who introduced me to this and to redlining and all different kinds of things, because I just had no context. I had no idea about it. So I am so grateful that now more people are going to be learning about this. And I think it's really neat that we have two different opportunities to give gratefulness to God for freedoms, for announcements of freedoms, different things along that line. So I'm grateful.
All right. Well, we have with us today Dr. Lois, and Dr. Sterling is with us today, my brother from another mother. And so either one of you can jump in on the Juneteenth, 4th of July correlation, or any thoughts you may have on the two.
You go ahead, Sterling. I need to hear from you, brother.
Well, actually, I have no thoughts about Juneteenth or the 4th of July. I think Frederick Douglass said, how in the world can we be celebrating a nation that's liberated when all of my people are in slavery? So,
talk about it, Sterling. What did Frederick say?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was very clear on that. So, And he was speaking to, well, actually speaking to the world now, but in effect, you can't talk about independence when you have thousands of people who are in shackles and operating as animals, making money for you, and you're celebrating. So I think that it has been and is perhaps an anomaly that has been set in place by the enemy. I mean, how can a nation that was built on slavery and that's still full of racial discrimination today possibly have biblical rooted independence is a question that I've labored with over the years.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's where I am on that.
Okay.
So I'm probably the cynic on the show today.
Oh, I don't know about all that. The rest of us just smile a lot more. That's all. We'll see what Lois has to say.
Well, I just would like to read the Galveston Tri-Weekly News, which printed General Order Number 3 on June 20th, 1865, the day after it was issued. The people are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection theretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain at their present home and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere, by order of the Major General Granger. And I just think it's so ironic that it says it involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property, and how documentation is important. Written things are important, spoken things are important, but what really matters is what we do and how we live and how we really treat each other. Because, there's not an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property today. There is, in writing, there is in many documents, but I think Juneteenth is a challenge to us, and July 4th is a challenge to us to continue to do the work of truth in the way that we view people and actually interact with people based on the words we say. They say words are cheap. These words were very important, and it's a holiday that's important to celebrate. But just like Sterling said, the Declaration of Independence was important, but it was made in a country where, women certainly weren't equal,
Yes.
Blacks weren't equal, Native Americans weren't equal. So, we got a lot of work to do.
Excellent. Well, and this brings Dennis, unless you want to jump in as well. I mean,
Yeah, Van, I just wanted to just say that I guess I'm a little like Sterling is in terms of where we are in terms of going between Juneteenth and July 4th. But I was reading this week a book by Vanilla Randall, which is Dying While Black. And it was an interesting analogy of the medical condition of Blacks in this country that go back to talk about the disparity in healthcare. We talk a lot about disparity in social and economic, but also in healthcare that is tremendously looked at in terms of how we look at things. I've had the opportunity of seeing my dad not get the proper treatment with his diabetes when he was coming along. That there was a report on Nightline back during the 80s where it showed that when Blacks went to the doctor, they were always recommended to amputate limbs, where other races weren't given that option right up front. But with Blacks, it was always amputation right away. And my dad had both his legs amputated and a few fingers and all before he passed away. So I think that we look at this disparity, and we've seen it a lot throughout the history, not only just in the social, and when we talk about, and we're going to talk about systematic racism, but we talk about the institution that seems to look at different races and decide that they're not a part of what they should be, or as Sterling, I'm going to take Sterling's language, look at other people as animals. We have a real disparity to not seeing people as people, and we're faced with that. And I think the problem is in the church as well as in society.
Yes, thank you for that, Dennis. And I feel very bad for what your father had to pass through as well. And there's so many horror stories. It's just like the Jewish Holocaust. There's so many stories of the Black Holocaust that has gone on as well. But I think that this can be a very teachable moment, to put it in a positive light for our nation, that we need to acknowledge, yes, there is a 4th of July, and yes, there is a Juneteenth. And what is that telling us as a nation? And what is this nation displaying to the world? And I think that in our nation right now, when so many are working hard to cut off the rest of history and only present the whitewash version, the sanitized, the romantic version, and not the underbelly side of what we went through, it was Derek Bell, who is the critical race scholar, a Black man, did his doctorate at Harvard. He wrote a book called Faces at the Bottom of the Well. Faces at the Bottom of the Well. And that book just blows you away with the reality of this whole issue that we're talking about right now. But there are many in our nation. It's almost like, there is a common grace, Lois. There's a theology of the common grace of God, and then there's the saving grace of God. And when we go back to the legislation, we are glad that the legislation took place, but we realize that just because you sign a document doesn't mean the attitude and disposition of a nation is going to change towards a particular people. And it's like I'm sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside. It's that kind of attitude. And so we need a nation that not only experiences the common grace of God to live up to laws, but the saving grace of our Lord. And to get saving grace, we know as Christians, you got to face the fact that I'm a sinner before a holy God. I've sinned. I am a sinner. You have to face the reality. And this nation has got to face the reality that nobody in this generation was back there. But we are living with the residue. Some are enjoying the privilege that were established through the Independence Day, and others are going through the oppression that came along with it at the same time. So it's paradoxical. They're both true, and we've got to own that. We've got to acknowledge that, or there can be no real grounds for reconciliation. And we're not trying to expose it to drum up hate, as some are saying, but it's to drum up the truth, because in the end, only truth is going to set us free. And so we must speak the truth in love. And that's what we're trying to talk about here on Straight Talk. We're speaking the truth. And I'm glad that everybody here has a heart for reconciliation. And we want the Lord to be glorified in this nation, to be blessed. That has been a blessing in some respects to all of us. I know it's a twofold love-hate relation, double consciousness, as Du Bois said, for the Black man. But nevertheless, there is a degree of blessing that is here for us by the grace of God. And so the acknowledgement of both Juneteenth and July can be put in a positive light by our nation to say, listen, these are the historical facts. And we are going to take advantage of that to bring reconciliation and restitution where it needs to take place, so that we can become the nation, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Van, I think what you said was just said was so important, because a lot of people, I've been getting the feeling from folks that are worried about or against critical race theory for its, certain points. are worried that, if you're criticizing your country, you're not a patriot. You don't love your country. You don't believe in America, and things like, if you don't love it, leave it. If you don't like what's going on here, just leave. But when you see something that has such potential, that has such, there's so much that's beautiful about America, and there's so much that is beautiful about our Constitution and the way that we're set up, and the things that people have bled and died for, and continue to. It's not because you hate America or you're not a patriot that you want to fix the things that need fixing. It's because you see the potential in it, and you see if there's injustice, it needs to be righted to justice so that we can be that shining beacon on a hill to the world. But if the world looks at us and says, wait a second, you guys say this, but you're doing this, what kind of reputation is our beloved America getting across the world? And I just wanted to say one more thing here is that as I was looking at this document, it says, the freedmen are advised to remain quietly, at their present homes and work for wages. Can you imagine? That's like saying, like a person who's enslaved in human trafficking, and saying, by the way, everybody's free now, but you have to stay here and do what you were doing before, only we'll pay you. We'll pay you a little bit, but you're probably going to have to pay rent anyhow that you can't afford, and you'll never really get out of here, So that's a lot of paradoxes. We have to be willing to work on paradox, I think.
Yes. Alaine, back around to you.
I think it's really important to find some comfort and some comfortability within that paradox, because we're so used to being either right or wrong or fixing things. And I think it's important for us to just be able to sit for a while in that, and embrace it for what it is. And then, consider what we can do to help alleviate things, because I think you all are right. We are in a critical time right now, and it's time to get somewhat comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yes, yes. I when I preach, wherever I preach, I open up with this phrase in prayer. It's a prayer. I say, Lord, I ask him to give me the tongue of the learned, that I can speak a word in season to him or her that is weary. But I always say, Lord, let your word comfort the disturbed, and consequently disturb those who are too comfortable. So it's a two-edged sword, Alaine. It's a two-edged sword indeed. It can cut, but it does. Right. It brings healing, comfort, and it disturbs those who are too comfortable, which we are all guilty of from time to time, for sure. And so I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you through with your thought, Alaine?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Well, it's just so good to see all of you. I feel like I've been away forever. But, on critical race theory, that is really a hot topic in our nation today. And people that know nothing about critical race theory are commenting that it's the boogeyman. Even Pat Robinson came out and said that it is an evil monster. And I wish I could sit down with Pat, because I've been to Regent. I stayed at the Founders Inn. I've stayed there. I even gave a lecture there one time when Dr. Young-E Cho showed up, and that just eclipsed everything I was doing that weekend. But I would love to say to Pat, what have you read? What do you really know? And this is the thing that sticks in my craw, which I would call a epistemic violence, an epistemic violence in the reality that all these comments are being made by leaders who are not well read on the subject of critical race issue, and the Southern Baptist Conference and others, Pat Robinson and others that I've heard. I can't remember all the names, but they've not talked to any Black brothers or sisters about it to find out our take. And again, the fourth point, there are only four major themes in critical race theory. And the fourth point, and I'll get to the other three later, is what's called, now this is a thematic structure. The fourth most important thing about critical race theory is centering voices of people of color, so that there aren't just white voices dominating the discussion and discourse. And that the real reconciliation attitude, I think it was Jamar Tisby, Lois, who said that, the ARC, awareness, relationship, commitment. Well, my point is, I would never think to speak on women issues without first consulting with women. And maybe I should just sit down and let them talk, but that's the way I feel about this issue, that there's Black feelings about critical race theory, and they're not giving us a audience. Pat Robertson didn't ask anybody that looks like me, what do you think about critical race theory and why? They just write it off because they say so. And I'm pushing against that. I'm not giving into that. Conceptual integration is the way scholars should handle any issue. Conceptual integration is the way to handle these issues. So I'm going to stop right there and not share the other points on this, so we can keep a roundtable going here. Anybody else want to jump in, please?
I just sent a couple of links in the chat that I think, Dennis, if you're willing to share that on the Facebook page, would be great. Jamar,
we're ahead of you, Lois.
Okay, yeah. Jamar Tisby sent an article, email. I'm on his email list this week, and it said, "This is the article on critical race theory I've been waiting for." And he talks about Andre Johnson's article, "Where did white evangelicalism's hatred of critical race theory really begin?"
Yes.
And so those two links, I think, would be helpful for people who are thinking about this and wondering, what is this all about, and why is everybody freaking out?
Yeah.
But I was wondering, you recently, Van, recommended Richard Delgado's book, the third edition of Critical Race Theory, an Introduction. And I was wondering if you can say anything more about his book.
Well, I could, but I wanted to touch on another side of, first of all, I've read the article that Jamar Tisby is. I've already read that article, but I just want to say that, I want to say some things about it from my little bit of limited knowledge, but there are many kinds of critical theory, and critical theory of itself is not bad. It's a matter of making a judgment call, does eat the meat and throw out the bones. And all of us who have gone through rhetoric, who have been in classes of debate, of scholarship, that you got to look at the good and the bad. You got to look at both sides and weigh the issues. That's what critical theory is all about. It's a hermeneutic of suspicion. A hermeneutic of suspicion, that you just ask a lot of questions about whatever is being stated to make sure that you arrive at a better understanding. And so that's what we're all about. But now when you get to critical race theory, that was started in the 70s, as Sterling knows, by Derek Bell, who was a lawyer. And here's the motive for critical race theory. There are many kinds of theories, but in critical race theory, Derek Bell was only concerned that we have laws and policies that discriminate. That's the systems. That's the structural problem. He was a lawyer, and he was also a legal scholar, and he wanted to get at a civil rights on those things. So he looked at the ways you critique, and his goal was that he wanted to see a better end. So 4 areas, Lois, that I think are important for our time frame that we of audience say is that number one, critical race theory believes that racism is normal in America. It's not where did that come from? It's normal. It's just normal. The way American society was intentionally structured. And I want to say that intentionally by the elite, the creme de la creme of any kind of political structure. It's the elite. So racism is normal. Number two, there's this thought of intersectionality, which means no person has a single unitary identity. That when you say, well, people are being discriminated, you say, well, women. And then when you say women, you say, well, wait a minute, black women and white women. So there's a lot of parts that go into any kind of critical situation. So that's intersectionality there. Then we have, and this is where America comes in, the third area of critical race themes are interest convergence. Interest convergence is a anti-racist movement that tends to make progress when it is in the best interest of those in a position of power. In other words, when America wants to look good to the world, then it'll go along with, okay, Martin Luther will sign the civil rights bill. That'll make us look good to the nation. Our hearts aren't in it. We fought you tooth and nail, but we'll finally give in because that makes us look. So it's only when it's in the best interest of the power base that they will all of a sudden make moves that progress our nation. And that is not a symbol of change of heart. That's a symbol of, I just want to look good in front of the audience. That's like a husband and wife that had a knockdown, drag out argument, and then they go to church and smile at each other. Well, you just know you just had a fight in the house, and you're not going to be talking when you leave, but you got to church and you had to put a smile on. Well, and America tries to put a smile on. So Derek Bell, and I encourage everyone to read his book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well. And Michelle Alexander, who wrote The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration. Derek Bell was one of her professors, and he blew her class away because he said, you know what? Racism is never going to end in America. It's not ever going to end. And she said, it kind of killed my optimism. But as I've gotten older, she said, Michelle Alexander, she said, I realized, you know what? He might be right. But the only nobility, Sterling, that is left for us if racism is going to be here until Jesus comes is the nobility of the struggle. We must still struggle for our freedom, the nobility of the struggle. And being the youngest of the three black guys on this program, I'm the youngest between Sterling and Dennis. I've come to agree with Derek Bell in the sense that unless the Lord drops them a visitation on this planet, on this nation that just reverses it, I think racism is going to go on until Jesus comes. But he's always going to raise up Ezra, Nehemiah's, Jeremiah's. God has always had a people, and our goal is to be one of those people till Jesus comes. And the last thing I'll say, Lois, is that I think also this Dr. Mark Lamont, he faced Christopher Rufo. Christopher Rufo, if you look it up, anyone, he is the main advocate against critical race theory that Trump and all the people that are standing against it, they're drawing from this man named Christopher Rufo, who works for the Manhattan Institute. And Lamont, Dr. Lamont, who's a PhD at Temple University, my brother, he does a very civic dialogue with him, very respectful, but I think he lays axe to the root that we understand that this argument that we don't let brief and unsubstantiated subjects, thoughts by those who have not taken the time to first just sit and listen and learn and read and research before you go public, which is the political thing to do. But scholars don't do that. Scholars should not do that. We need to have intellectual integrity, and I'll stop right there.
I think that the essential conversations regarding race in America have been hijacked and curtailed by broad narrative attacks.
I can't get over.
Launched by Christopher Rufo, and you're right, he's a senior fellow at Manhattan Institute. And the attacks by Rufo and other critics, other pundits and politicians, including conservative evangelicals, who have joined the effort, are shutting down critical race equity work, critical race equity conversations, in institutions across this country. So this is a strategy. This whole issue, it's about shutting down discussions about race in schools and universities and governments, and extending it further into so that it doesn't go any further into society.
Mhm.
But I don't necessarily see it as anything other than a political strategy that is designed to cover the belly of the Western belly, cover the belly of the
Mhm.
West. This effort started, if you remember now, and I just want everybody just sync with me just for a moment. This effort of countering critical race theory started just a few weeks after the public outcry over the murder of George Floyd. Before that, you did not hear about Bell's work and it being a negative. Matter of fact, it was just a course of study. But Rufo penned a piece describing racial equity in government as radical.
Mhm.
He said it was an aggressive, new racialist ideology to fund a corrupt consultant class while maligning all white people. Now you think about that for a minute. How in the world are you going to malign all white people? Only all white people can malign all white people. No, no. I mean, no, I'm serious. If it wasn't so terrible, it would almost be a comic strip,
Right.
because Trump's administration adopted Rufo's efforts to shut down conversations on race.
Correct.
And in documents explaining the order that banned the use of the term systemic racism, among others, they elevated similar narratives across the country, attacking critical race theory and racist ideologies. And so I've been talking to a group here in Texas, a bunch of great pastors, and a large number of them are evangelicals and Pentecostals. And one just said, I really don't know where I stand on this thing because there's so much coming at me at one time. Well, that's a strategy. See, that's a marketing and advertising strategy. Just fire right at you until you just ate. And so they got all these billboards that has these floats and burgers and fries. And before you know it, you're stopping at the nearest Dairy Queen.
Come on now.
Yeah, you weren't hungry, but because they just fired at you, it hit the mind, and the mind went to developing this data, and so it triggered something that made you think you were hungry. Well, that's where we are right now, and so I think that we have to do more in line of countering these terms that are being used to try and paint systemic racism as okay. They don't say those words, but they're trying to paint it as okay. It's almost like what was read earlier that says that you're free, but you can't leave the plantation. You're free people now. You got total freedoms of everybody else. However, you can't. Well, the moment you say I can't do it, you've just negated your declaration of freedom.
Yes.
And I don't mean to
No, that's good. That's good. That's absolutely good. And so right. And Dennis, is it not true historically that if the white church had really stood up as the conscience of God in politics and morality, if in not only the white church during slavery, but even down from ages on, the black and white coming together finally, in many ways on doctrine, on worldview, if we spoke up more as salt and light, critical race theory wouldn't even be necessary on planet Earth, because we are called to speak the truth in love. And if the church had been doing its job and not complicit, then people like Derek Bell maybe not would have been a secondary issue. Do you not agree, Dennis?
I agree, Van, but we've got to remember that this nation, in terms of what we call nationalism, and we get to Christian nationalism and white nationalism, has its viewpoint from a European standpoint that we came here with this, they came here, Europeans came here with a kind of superior attitude anyway. And so the congregational churches, which
Good,
started
good, good.
in the Northeast, had that sort of idea. And so as it started going down, even when you had the Southern churches, and remember the governor or the governor of Georgia brought in John Wesley to sort of convert the Indians and the black slaves, and he failed miserably
Yeah.
and went back to England. So, you've got this idea. And I think that when we start looking at the church, and I looked at the Civil War era and saw that the church was on both sides of the issue in the North and in the South. You had
Yeah.
Southern churches that were kind of supporting slavery and Northern churches that were abolitionists. So the church has really kind of stayed in the middle of this whole argument. And we have this, we can see it with the Southern Baptist Convention that just left, with this whole idea of the church really not wanting to address this. And I think if we can't address this in the church, we sure can't address this in society.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I agree with you, Van. We're probably going to have this problem until Jesus comes, but we've got to fight and understand that if we're going to really fulfill if the gospel is really the good news,
Yes.
it can't be good news unless we all, from an equality basis, face the salvation issue and look at the salvific idea that the gospel is for all people
Yeah.
of all races, and we all embrace the gospel message. It can't be one thing for one and another thing for the other, because when Jesus came, his whole issue was to deal with the religious right and what they were talking about. And so it becomes good news. Why is it good news? Because I want to release you from the traditions. I want to release you from all of the things that the religious are talking about in the upper class, even in Jesus' day. And Alaine, you probably can help me out with this, but I had read that most of the Pharisees in Jesus' day had a threefold prayer. They wanted not to be a Gentile, a woman, or a dog. And so look at that. That's that racial disparity. Even in Jesus' day, and a good Jew did not even want to, they had to get this elitist idea of racism, because as far as they were concerned, they were trapped because they were in bondage to the Roman government. And so the only area of superiority they had was their heritage. And so they began to look at it from that standpoint. And so we get this struggle throughout history of one nationality fighting over another nationality, and we're coming together, and then the racial divide from nationality lines. And so the New World was all about eliminating all of that, which we had in Europe and other countries. So coming to the New World, the Americas, was a way for this fresh start for society in general. That's what it was supposed to be. That's why this was called the New World, because this was going to be the beginning of a whole new look at society. And it wasn't. It became the same old thing.
Or we say in the neighborhood, same old, same old. What do you think, Alaine? What do you think,
Well,
Alaine?
well, hold on just a second.
Well, she's going to leave the show. She's going to leave the show, I think.
Dennis, let me add one piece to your statement. You mentioned equality. May I also include equity?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'm done.
Right.
All right. Before Alaine leaves us, Sterling, let's jump in there.
Oh, I so appreciate you all. I do. So, in regards to critical race theory, I am very much in the learning process. I had no idea what it was until about a year ago, to be completely honest about it. And so I've been reading and learning and getting all sorts of videos from people, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, there's so much to say. What I'm noticing is that there's a popular side to this and there's an academic side to this. And the popular side is going insane. And the academic side is more or less saying, hold on just a minute. This is about people. It's about learning who they are and their story and making sure that they're included, not so much that they're taking over or we're taking over or anything like that, but just understanding that there's a different viewpoint, there's different understandings, there's different history out there. Okay.
Yes.
Now, with that being said, I had a really interesting conversation with a couple of friends. I think it was a couple of weeks ago now. And we were talking about George Floyd and how so many white people were, for the first time, they were really seeing what happens to Black people on a regular basis. And so there was this big push to include and to advocate and to fight for and on behalf of. But then with critical race theory, which is coming right alongside at the same time, the popular version of this has just exploded. And many of those people who were wanting to advocate and to be activists in all different kinds of things, they have stepped back because of critical race theory.
That was the idea.
Yes. Yes.
That's the strategy that I was speaking of.
Yes. Yes. And so it was very interesting because in this conversation, I said, people are stepping back because they don't know and they don't understand critical race theory.
Yes.
And the fear of not knowing and understanding, it's easier to shut out rather than stay in and try to learn some different perspectives on things. And so it was just a very, very interesting conversation. And that's, and I wish you could have seen their faces. They're both Black women and they were just stunned when I said that, critical race theory has really pushed people away from being the people that God's called them to be.
Right.
And I, more than anything, regardless of where people stand on critical race theory, which is very important, regardless of where they stand, I just want for us to realize that we're talking about people. People who are created in God's image. And if we ever forget that, if we ever step away from that, then, oh my goodness, God have mercy on us.
Yes.
Right.
And Alaine, isn't that what Jamar Tisby says? You got to have, awareness, but the second part of ARC is relationship.
Yes.
You got to have, and then the commitment, so you're absolutely so right. That's how we hold our feet to the fire. That if we have to look at each other, we'll be more careful about what we say. And then also, Alaine and Lois, I think it's true, and Sterling, I know how Sterling feels about this, is that, anytime in the world, the church should be on the avant-garde of what's going on planet Earth, because the church reveals the wisdom and the nature of God, and God is aware of everything. So if we're attuned to him like we should be about earthly things, then we should be on the avant-garde and not playing catch up all the time. And then if something does come up, we ought to run to the issue, learn to understand it, comprehend it, and then after all the research, come back with a thesis on whatever it is we've investigated, as a result of that. But also, we're down to the last 15 minutes, I guess, Dennis. I think also this issue of colonialism has really been in my heart lately, that, when the Europeans decided to colonize, discover new worlds, they colonized wherever they went. And in their colonization, they had the blessing of the church, the papal blessings. They had the financial backing of the government, whether it was a king or a queen. But they also had this enlightenment thing. And Joel Goza brings this out in his book, Unholy Ghost. They had this enlightenment feeling that they were the only ones that were given to rationale. So who better to control the world and save the world than Europeans under the Enlightenment? And that's what comes. Now, I think one of the things I'm working on right now is that I think we need to decolonize America. We need a gospel that will decolonize, and we need more post-colonial theologians and scholars and Sunday school teachers and Christian writers. We need to be post-colonial, that we're trying to get the negative side of colonization out of our system and out of this nation, so that the pure gospel, as Dennis said, we don't even want Christian nationalism. We just out with all of that. But we've got to really recognize that we've got to decolonize, and therefore we must be post-colonial scholars and theologians. And that's what we're trying to accomplish, which is anti-racism for sure. But I think we need to expose it, and we need to, even though they control most of the media, most of the media is not controlled by marginalized people. But in every avenue that God has given us, my prayer when I did it on night, I say, Lord, whether on Facebook or YouTube or television, the few times that we can speak, and I think, I hope all of us will pray this, the few times we get to speak up personally and through whatever media we get, that the Lord would so anoint those words that we don't have to make an 8-hour speech, but just a few words that we say would be anointed and just touch the hearts of people and destroy the shackles from their eyes to awake to the truth and be reconciled for the glory of God.
Van, let me jump in here for a minute.
Yes, sir.
I think the other thing with this is when we talk about the idea of racism, we also need to talk about the idea of class structure. Yeah. Because this is what it's really all about too. Getting back to the Aryan controversy, and the whole idea is how people see themselves as superior, equals, or inferiors. And I think that's been a class structure, no matter what the nationalities are. We have it in every culture. There are those who consider themselves superior, those who consider themselves inferior. Very rarely do they consider equals. So right. If I'm considered superior, it doesn't matter what I think of you in terms of, if I consider you an inferior, you'll never be my equal because you're inferior anyway. I need to keep you in an inferior attitude. And I think that's the attitude that's developed in this country with Blacks, being 3/5 of a person. Is that I understand who you are and I accept you, but as an inferior, you will always be an inferior.
Wasn't that the same issue that Jesus had when he stopped at the well and he's talking to this Samaritan woman, and it was like unheard of? Well, that's because they considered them to be inferior.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's where we are. If we're considered inferior, how are we ever going to be considered equal if there's always going to be superiors and inferiors? And there's never that equal.
Right. And Dennis, if we go back to the root of this thing, like Joe Goza was talking about, Martin Luther King was trying to go back to root, you have men like Immanuel Kant, Karl von Linnaeus, who actually taught a scale of superior to inferior, superior being white, that's the social construct. White is superior. And at the bottom of this classification are Blacks who are inferior. And so this whole social construct, this binary between Black and white, was initiated by Immanuel Kant, Karl von Linnaeus, and others through the Enlightenment, the slave master myth coming out. And so unless we deal with that issue of, I always believe that the gospel, Dennis, should take those who feel inferior and raise us up, but those who feel superior, bring them down. And that's the place of equity. That's where the Bible says, a Hebrew idiom, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, which I understand to mean that no matter when you started the race, because it's the grace of God, we all cross over the finish line together. And the superior and the inferior need to meet at the cross and come to a place of true equality.
Well, you took my thunder, because that's where I was going, because Sterling brought up this idea of equity, and that's where I was coming at, with the superior and the inferior coming to that place so that we could get to this equality, which we haven't. When we talk about that, we're talking about, Lois, about women. Here we are now. We got to talk about women being in place, whether Black or white. We've got to talk about not only racism, we talk about sexism. It just goes on and on. The engine, the whole train starts hooking up more cars as we get to this. And so there's a separation between what fuels the engine. In this case, as Alaine mentioned, George Floyd has fueled this engine that now all these cars are being attached. Racism, cultural bias, sexism.
Intersectionality.
And so now we've got these cars, the train's becoming longer and longer. So now there are barriers in front of the engine that's trying to push this, that's saying, no, this doesn't even exist. This is not here, but it is. So we're getting, so now we really have a bad issue.
Yeah. But where iniquity does abound, grace does much more abound. And if it's fight or flight, I say, let's stand and fight. Let's rumble in the jungle. Let's rumble. Is there not a cause? I mean, is Goliath that big that David under the anointing can't bring that giant down? I think we need to rumble to this until Jesus comes.
I think we need to get you a pulpit so you can preach.
Yeah.
Oh. What do you think, Lois? Bring us home.
Okay, well, this is what I'm thinking is Isaiah 40, a voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God.
Yeah.
Every valley will be raised up, every mountain will be made low. The rough ground shall be made level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all people will see it, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember years and years ago reading a book, I think it was by Tommy Tenney, who talked about our lives. We have things that God needs to bring down in us and things that God needs to bring in us, up in us, so that the glory of the Lord can be revealed. That he says people need to be able to run right up your back to heaven, to see Jesus, to see God. And as the things that have been so proud and haughty and superior and all this stuff in our country, as people can humble themselves, and white people I'm talking about, those that have been in power, and also, you know, men who have been in power who have needed to come and be humble about their situation, and women and blacks and Native Americans and people who have, you know, been vulnerable and poor and are brought up, that the glory of the Lord can be revealed here. That has to be our goal. That, you know, we don't want to just, you know, fix racism in America. We don't want to just have, you know, a new theory or a new idea. We want God's glory to be revealed. And that can happen as these valleys are raised up and mountains are made low. The rough ground becomes level. The rugged places a plain. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
Okay, we need a pulpit for you too.
Good preaching. I'm ready to get saved now, Lois. I'm ready to yield.
I come from a Baptist tradition. I'm ready to take up an offering.
All right, come on.
I'm ready to make the altar call.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, Lois, there's I can't think of her name right now, but she is a teacher at Wellesley College, a woman's college. And I taught a course at Gordon Conwell on the Bible and race 3 years ago. And there is a YouTube, it's entitled Unpack Your Parachute.
Yeah,
and
I'm familiar with that.
You play with that?
Also a book. There's also a book with the same title.
Okay. Well, the professor is a woman professor at Wellesley, and she had a staff of black females on her staff. And she was talking about how she had to fight with men always to have that equality in academics. And one day she turned to her staff, which were black females. They said, well, you are the same way towards us that they are towards you. And she said, she's a Christian now. She said, oh, no, I don't believe that. And so she went home just irate. And she said, she got on her knees and said, Lord, if there is some kind of racism in me, show me. Mm-hmm. And over the next month or so, she said the Lord kept showing her like 30 something ways. And she kept unpacking her parachute. things kept being revealed, she never knew about herself in that moment. And she shared this, and I let her share it. I was at Gordon Conwell, and my whole class, there was about 30 whites in the class, and I didn't want to bring up white privilege to them, So I let this lady and Tim Keller speak to white privilege. But at the end of the class, they all understood what the lady was trying to say. And we all have blinders. We all have blinders.
Yeah.
When the Spirit of God falls on any of us, whatever in our lives is not right will be revealed.
And Tim Keller has kept up the fight. If you followed him, he stayed really on focus.
Yes, he has. Yes, he has. And I really like that. Unpack your parachute. And she sought the Lord. And I think what she did is what everybody should do. If somebody brings up racism, whatever, we should immediately seek the Lord. Lord, what do you say? What do you say about this? But I find one white pastor wrote me on Facebook behind Lamont and Rufo's debate, which was very civil, but he attacked Lamont the whole time. And I said to him in response, I said, I find it interesting that the only negative things you had to say about that whole presentation on YouTube was concerning Lamont, and you had nothing to say to Christopher Rufo. I find that interesting. That is what you call a bias right there for sure. So anyhow.
Van, what you said about the need for discernment and what Alaine said about the popularization of this issue, whether for or against critical race theory, mostly against it, has been popularized. As soon as you can name something as bad and evil and somehow a threat to the church, then just the word itself is like, ooh, and there's fear and there's, and people drop their God-given spirit empowered ability for discernment. And I recently had a brother in Christ. He's 80. No, he just turned 90 years old. And he wrote me and said, can you send me some information on critical race theory? Because I want to listen to something from an affirmative view on it. And here's a brother who's been a missionary his whole life. He's probably hearing a lot of the negative. And Van, you were so helpful to send me some information and to help him out. But 90 years old, and he's willing to listen and learn and discern and try to figure out what is this, not just running away because of a term. And it's like when somebody starts talking about environmental issues, it's like, ooh, those are nature worshiping tree huggers. It's no, you have to say, no, this is actually a biblical principle of caring for creation. God started this. And man didn't make up this critical, the ideas, the core of the ideas in this about the way we should treat each other. These are God's ideas. These are biblical ideas. And Christians need to come back to, wait a second, what is the core of what we're talking about here? And if they get back to that core, they won't step away. If they're true devoted Christians, spirit-filled Christians, they will dive in as God helps us. They will dive in and do what needs to be done.
That's a good word. That's a good word.
Very good. Our time's about out, so we probably need to wrap this up.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, this has been a very good show. And I want to say to all the panelists, I love you. And it's so good to see everybody after we took a little hiatus there, but it's so good to be in dialogue back with all of you. And I pray that everything has been shared, that there'll be people in the audience that you'll be touched and blessed and provoked. We want to comfort the disturbed and disturb those of you who are too comfortable. And don't let Marxism and communism, that attack, fool you when we're looking at the gospel behind this. This is the Christological lens that we're looking at critical race theory and the hermeneutic of suspicion. So I think I'm so grateful that God's grace, iniquity may abound, but grace does much more abound. And even though, Derek Bell, faces at the bottom of the well, didn't think we'd ever, I'm so glad there is a heaven, that we fight all the way on earth, but we're going to a place that is far greater, a shalom like we've never experienced. And I invite all of you that are listening Turn your heart over to the Lord. Ask him. Let him speak to you. You're disheveled by all that's going on. Your peace is in the one who is our peace, the shalom, God himself. He will he will comfort your heart. He will quell your mind. He will give you your raison d'etre, your reason for living. So I say to all of you, the Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon each one of you and give you shalom in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. Amen and amen. God bless you. We'll see you next time.
Amen.